Felly, rydyn ni'n ffodus iawn heno. O gennym banel o bobl arbennig iawn gyda ni i allu trafod cysyniad o'r Goedlan Genedlaethol. Yna gyflwyno nhw nawr. Yn gyntaf, mae Ann Burgoyne, rheolwr ymgysylltu rhanddeiliad yn adran tir natur a chwydwigaeth Llywodraeth Cymru, ac James Biot, pennaeth polisi Goedlan Genedlaethol i Llywodraeth Cymru, a bydd cyflwyniad o'r cysyniad prosiect gan James ar y cychwyn. Mi oedd Erica Dawson-Davies, pennaeth rhaglen y Goedlan Genedlaethol, i fod i ymuno, ond yn anffodus mae hi'n wael, felly dim y dda o gwbl. Felly, da ni'n dymuno dda iddi, a gobeithio fydd hi'n gwella yn fuan. I ddilyn cyflwyniad gyn James, bydd aelodau'r panel yn cynnig trosolwg a sylwadau hunain, ac yna i drafod cwestiynau a sylwadau chi. A gyda ni heno mae Richard Roderick, ffermwr o fferm Newtown y Banau Brycheiniog, sydd wedi bod yn fferm arddangos i cyswllt-ffermio, a nawr mae o mentor i'r gwasanaeth mentora fel cyswllt-ffermio. Gan o'r gyfoeth o wybodaeth a phrofiad ac wedi gweithredu sawl prosiect amgylcheddol ar y fferm law yn llaw gyda rhedeg y busnes yn llwyddiannus, yn ogystal ag ennill sawl gwobr yn y sector amaeth. Hefyd, nesaf, Geraint Davies, ffarmwr yn Fedwarian Uchaf yn Bala, sydd hefyd, mi ddeud, yn aelod o Fwrdd Cyfoeth Naturiol Cymru. A hefyd yn gadeirydd Undeb Ffermwyr Cymru yn Sir Meirionnydd. Os dwi'n iawn, Geraint. Mae'r fferm yn fferm ffocws ar rhwydwaith cyswllt-ffermio, ac ar hyn o bryd, da ni'n edrych ar brosiect i edrych ar wella strwythur y grychoedd i gyd-fynd â rhaglen cylchbori ar ran cynllun y ffarm a system y ffarm i'r gwartheg sugno. Nesaf, mae gen ni Elwyn Edwards, ymgynghorwr coedwigaeth sydd eto gyda cyfoeth o wybodaeth yn y maes, ac wedi cyflawni llawer mewn gwasanaeth i'r diwydiant coedwigaeth. Mae o hefyd yn fentor i gyswllt-ffermio yn y maes coedwigaeth ac yn cynnig gwasanaeth drwy'r gwasanaeth cynghori. Dr Glenda Thomas hefyd, cyfarwyddwr grŵp cynghori ar ffermydd a bwyd gwyllt, sef FWAG Cymru. Adnabyddus iawn dros y wlad gyda ffermwyr a wedi cynnig cyfoeth o gyngor a gwybodaeth i ffermwyr ar faterion amgylcheddol i wella cynefinoedd ar y fferm drwy gwahanol gynlluniau. Bydd Glenda'n arwain ar brosiect gyda cyswllt-ffermio i adnabod statws bioamrywiaeth ar dair o'n ffermyr ni ar ddangos ni yn y flwyddyn nesaf hefyd. So mae hwnna'n brosiect da ni'n edrych ymlaen ato fo yn fawr. Ac yn ola, gyflwyno chi Rhys Owen, pennaeth Cadwraeth Coed ag Amaeth i Awdurdod Parc Cenedlaethol Eryri. Rhys eto'n adnabyddus iawn i ffermwyr Eryri ac wedi cyflawni llawer yn y maes amgylcheddol dwythredu a gweinyddu gwahanol gynlluniau. A dwi'n ymwybodol bod gynno fo gynllun ar y gweill rwan a'r gychwyn lle i fedru cynnig i ffermwyr y fro. Hefyd yn gwisgo het ffermwr Rhys, felly yn gweld y ddwy ochr fel petai. Diolch yn fawr iawn i chi gyd am fod gyda ni heno. A heb aros chwan mwy, na i gychwyn awn ni drosodd at James i allu cyflwyno. Cofiwch, peidiwch ag anghofio gyrru'ch sylwadau a'ch cwestiynau mewn ar y tab question and answer, cwestiynu ag ateb. Felly, James, na i drosodd i ti wan. Diolch yn fawr iawn.
Thank you, Geraint. Good evening, everyone. So I'm James Byatt, working National Forest team in Welsh Government. So I just want to say many thanks for taking the time to join this session tonight. We're really keen to use it to hear views from all of you to help inform our thinking on the approach that we take to creating a national forest in Wales. I'm going to spend maybe 5 to 10 minutes just sort of running through the background to the National Forest in case you're not all aware, roughly where we're at, and then provide an overview of some work we've been doing recently on the outcomes that we'd like to see from the National Forest. So the First Minister, Mark Drayford, announced his intention to develop a National Forest for Wales in his manifesto commitments in 2018. Through planting more trees and enhancing existing woodlands, a National Forest can provide many opportunities for Wales, such as contributing to decarbonisation goals and the climate change emergency, supporting a reverse in the decline in biodiversity, positive effects on physical health and well-being of our people, supporting commercial business activity such as timber production and adventure tourism. On the 12th of March 2020, so 12th of March this year, the First Minister officially launched the National Forest Programme. It was the programme rather than the forest itself. Together with the Minister for Environment, Energy and Rural Affairs, Leslie Griffiths, he described an ambition for a national forest that extends the length and breadth of Wales, and announced that an extensive period of stakeholder engagement would commence, so that creating a national forest will be a collective effort with government, business and communities all working towards a shared goal. However, despite our best intentions to start the engagement period in late spring, early summer, as with everybody, COVID-19 struck. We had to delay our plans, rethink how we could do it in this new ways of working. So today's meeting is really the start of that engagement, which we hope to start, 4 or 5 months ago. So where are we now? So it's worth mentioning the National Forest Programme is still at a very early stage of what will be a long-term phased programme of activity. We want to use the engagement period to understand how we might approach a national forest in Wales, so the proposals work for everyone and deliver the maximum benefits. Today's meeting will be really helpful for understanding what you think will make the National Forest a success and is the start of that conversation. We'll be talking to lots of other groups of stakeholders over the coming months to get their views, with the intention to bring proposals together into a more formal consultation period next year. So this isn't going to be the last opportunity you'll have to comment. There'll be lots more opportunities. So we're working on the basis the National Forest will be in both urban and rural locations. They will include existing, good quality, well-managed woodlands to make the best of what we've already got. Focus on enhancing unmanaged woodlands to get them up to a good standard, and also planting new areas of woodland across Wales. To create a national forest that spans the country and benefits the whole of Wales, we're not limiting ourselves to 1 or 2 large areas of woodland, but instead we have been developing a set of outcomes which, if woodlands are able to meet, can be badged national forest. We're currently developing a national forest brand as we speak. I'll come back to the idea of outcomes-based approach later in a few minutes anyway. I'll come back to that shortly, so keep that in mind. So you may be aware that Ministers allocated £4.5 million in capital funding to the National Forest this year to start to test future funding and delivery models for National Forest. Some of the projects include, so I think it was a couple of months ago now, but we launched the Forestry Industry Recovery Scheme. So some of you may have seen that, which provides funding for building tree nursery capacity in Wales and other things such as ground preparation equipment for tree planting. If you're not aware of it, but might be interested, I think it closes on the 18th of October, so there's not a great deal of time left, but it might be worth looking out for. That's the Forestry Industry Recovery Scheme. We've also been working with the National Lottery Heritage Fund on a community woodland grant scheme, which runs over 2 years, aimed at sort of community woodlands, people coming together to develop those community woodlands, enhance them. But it's a 2-year program, but it's on a first come, sort of first served basis. And then we're also working with National Resources Wales, NRW, to enhance woodlands and improve access to woodlands on the Welsh Government woodland estate, and also looking for them to create new woodlands that could be part of the National Forest in the future. I think it's probably fair to say that whilst the National Forest will include grant schemes, we're trying to view it as more than just another grant scheme and more of a catalyst for woodland creation across Wales. For example, as I've said, we want it to include other existing good quality woodlands that are there already, whether that's for people already in Wales or encourage visitors to come to Wales, as well as other woodland creation enhancement under other initiatives and schemes where they meet the outcomes that we're looking to achieve. So all of that will come together to help us to achieve our Connected National Forest, creating an asset possibly similar to the coast path that we've already got in the future. But we're talking quite a long way down the road for that, but certainly a national asset that could be along those lines would be a great achievement for us all. So that's the first bit of the presentation. I'm now going to focus a bit more down on some work we've been doing recently. So if David could share the share the slide, or start to share the slide that I sent across. But so as I touched on earlier, we've been thinking about taking an outcomes-based approach to the National Forest rather than geographic approach. So rather than limit ourselves to a few areas in Wales, we wanted it to be spread across the whole country, so everybody has access to the National Forest. We'd like to use the discussion today to get a sense of the outcomes that you would like to achieve from a National Forest. We're really keen to hear ideas from yourselves, but as a starter for 10, we've recently been giving it some thought along with our Woodland Strategy Advisory Panel Task and Finish group, and we've come up with 6 potential outcomes. So I can't see the screen at the moment, so I'm assuming, yeah, it's there. Just checking it's there. These are very much work in progress, so feel free to feed in any comments during this session today. If they're not quite right, or you've got other ones you'd like to add, then let us know. I'll just quickly run through the 6 outcomes. I don't want to spend too long on it, but I'll quickly run through the 6 outcomes, provide a little background as to why we've proposed each one, and maybe touch on some of the questions we'll need to work through either with yourselves and others. It's worth mentioning before you all sort of reel back in horror that these outcomes for the National Forest are for the programme as a whole. So we wouldn't necessarily expect to see all of the outcomes at each woodland that we enhance or create. We maybe see a mixture of them at different woodlands. But things like good quality, well-managed woodlands, for example, is something we would want to see at all National Forest sites. So if I just quickly run through the 6 outcomes. So the first one is around good quality, well-designed and managed resilient woodlands. I've already touched on this, but it's essential we enhance our existing woodlands and accelerate the rate of tree planting in Wales in both rural and urban locations if we're to meet the challenges of the climate change emergency announced in 2019 and support a reversing the decline of biodiversity in Wales. Wales woodlands can also provide many other benefits, such as health and well-being, recreation, tourism, ecosystem services, timber supply and employment opportunities. The key question around this one is how are we going to define good quality, well-designed and managed resilient woodlands? There are standards out there already, such as the UK Forestry Standard, and there's also the UK Woodland Assurance Standard, potentially others that we can look at. We know they don't necessarily lend themselves to all types of woodlands, so there will be further work needed here. We've included resilient in this outcome because it's going to be really important to ensure the woodlands we enhance and create are future-proofed and stand the test of time, particularly in light of climate change. So that's going to be a really important element of that. I'll come back to that in one of the other outcomes slightly later. We really like to see woodlands accessible to people. Woodlands provide a range of benefits to people, including improving people's health and well-being, support community development, employment opportunities and learning opportunities, new skills, etc. The National Forest will need to be accessible to enable and encourage diverse people with different needs and issues to use the woodlands. The key question here is how do we define accessibility? It'd be interesting to get views from yourselves as part of this discussion, if possible, how you would define accessibility. We could think of it at sort of the national level and making it easier for people to get to woodlands, having them woodlands close to where people live. And then obviously once they get to the woodland themselves, having things in infrastructure in place to support the visitor experience and responsible access of the woodlands, whether it's things like signage and clear footpaths and clear signage. Knowledge and skills is a cross-cutting theme of the National Forest. I think it'll be particularly important for this outcome. So we can create lots of great woodlands, but if people don't know they're there or how to use them properly and responsibly, then we won't realize the benefits. So I think that's something that will be important here too. Okay, community involvement in woodlands. So sort of leading on from the last one, we really want the National Forest to help communities to re-engage with nature. I think this is particularly important in urban areas which may lack green spaces. We'd like to see local communities involved in developing plans for restoring and creating woodlands in their local areas. Ideally, this would also lead on to opportunities to get involved in the enhancement, creation, and management of the woodlands through setting up of voluntary groups and school groups. Now, appreciate community involvement. There'll be different elements of different levels of community involvement. For some woodlands where there aren't communities nearby or then maybe not so interested, it might be a very light touch consultation exercise. But there may be other areas where there's a lot of interested stakeholder groups, people want to get involved, and there may be the opportunity to do more of the management and the co-design, etc. of the woodlands. But it really depends on where it is, the location, and how engaged everybody is. But we wouldn't want this to be a barrier to put people off creating woodlands, but it's something we would like to see. Connected woodlands is an important outcome. So I've touched on this before, but the National Forest will be very important for helping to halt the decline in biodiversity in Wales. So as existing woodlands are enhanced and new woodlands created, it'd be really important to take connectivity into account to help connect habitats, build resilient ecological networks to enable nature to recover and flourish in Wales. And again, this is one thing it's really good for everyone to take this into account. I appreciate, particularly in the early years of the National Forest, it may not be possible to connect all woodlands to other woodlands, and we need to define what we mean by connected as well. There's different ways of connecting woodlands, which may have come up in the discussion later. But again, it's something we'd like to take into account, and it will become easier in time as Wales becomes more wooded. But for now, it should be something that's seriously considered. There's also a question around whether we think about connectivity more broadly than just nature as well, and whether we think about it from a people perspective as well, and how we connect people to the national forests, whether it's through footpaths, cycle paths, so that if we are going to create something similar to the coast path, say the National Forest Path or National Forest Way, how do we make sure people are engaged and connected to it as well, and also emotionally connected, which will be important. So we've got dynamic multi-purpose woodlands and trees. So the National Forest should aim to maximise the economic, social and environmental benefits that can be delivered from woodland through the creation of multi-purpose sites. This could include all sorts of things ranging for leisure and tourism, combined with small local level enterprises such as firewood, local sawmills, woodcrafts, carving and turnery. Could be large scale commercial timber harvesting businesses supplying more homegrown timber to our industry, such as house building, whilst also supporting biodiversity. So the question really interesting to hear is how can we encourage more multi-purpose woodlands that do deliver for people, nature, and also commercially, and how realistic that is. And then the last one is woodlands that demonstrate learning, research, and innovation. We're keen that national forest sites, and this won't be for all national forest sites, but we're keen that certainly some national forest sites do demonstrate what can be, what you can really achieve from doing really nice, good quality, multi-purpose woodlands. There's lots of good work out there already, which we can build on. We can test new ways of working and share that innovation, research, and learning with others. I'll give you a few examples of what we're thinking about, but this could be all sorts of different things, but it could be from new and different ways of delivering multi-purpose woodlands, engaging local communities in their development and management, new ways of supporting biodiversity or testing new ways of supporting biodiversity, different ecosystem services which could be provided, such as flood and drought protection, ensuring resilience to future climate change, choosing the right trees in the right places, and education opportunities involving schools, etc. in woodlands. So again, the sort of question would be good to hear from people is, how can we use the National Forest to demonstrate what can be achieved from multi-purpose woodlands? And what sort of things would you like to see more of, or we could do more of? So I'll stop there. Before I hand over, as I say, there's quite a few questions there. It'd be good to understand what you would like to achieve from National Forest as part of this discussion today. And if you have any thoughts on the outcomes I've quickly run through, or if there's others that you would like to see, then feel free to share that with us today. But thank you very much.
Sorry, Grains, da chi ar mute.
Thank you. Sorry. Yeah, thank you very much, James. Diolch yn fawr iawn. Oedd o'n sylfaen da i gychwyn y drafodaeth. Jyst i fod yn glir bod y cysyniad yma, y prosiect yma, dydy hi ddim yn gynllun grants, fel da ni'n sôn. Pobl yn sôn am ariannu ac yn y blaen, dydy'r National Forest ddim yn gynllun grants, ond yn edrych ar elfen eraill i ariannu gwaith ar gyfer goedlan y National Forest. Felly, jyst i gychwyn, na i luchio allan i'r panel i gychwyn ar trosolwg a cael barn sydyn iawn. Ac os ti'n myndio hys, na i gychwyn efo ti, rhoi ti ar y spot fel bethau. Diolch yn fawr.
Ia, neu gwybod bod gen i ddigon i ddeud, mae'n siŵr illa. Ia, wel, noswaith dda i chi pawb sy'n gwrando. Ia, diolch am y cyfle fod yn rhan o'r panel, rhywbeth reit exciting a newydd. Mae rai fi ddeud, pan glywis i gyntaf am y National Forest, ges i rwchdi bach o panic. achos doeddan ni'n gwybod llawer yn byd amdano fo. A mi ddoth y cyhoeddiad allan bod yna goedwig genedlaethol newydd yn mynd i fod, ac oeddan ni'n y twll o'ch braidd lly. Ond fel i glirwyd yn gynharach, da chi bod, mae'n amlwg iawn, doedd y sefyllfa Covid ma ddim wedi helpu i fedru cael y negeseuon allan mewn ffordd oedden nhw wedi obeithio. Felly gobeithio bod unrhyw un oedd yn teimlo rhywbeth debyg i fi wedi cael ei roid i argyhoeddi bod na rwan mae'r broses yn cychwyn os liciwch chi. So yn teimlo dipyn fwy cyffyrddus am hynny ac yr awdurdod hefyd mewn ffordd. A cyfle da i gychwyn o'r cychwyn ynde. Fel Parc Cenedlaethol yn amlwg, mae hwn yn hitio ar lot o bethau i ni. Ni a'n teulu ardaloedd o harddwch naturiol hefyd. Da ni'n gweld, da ni'n delio efo mynediad, cynefinoedd, archeoleg, pobl, newid hinsawdd a'r tirwedd o bob diwrnod mewn ffordd, felly mae o'n mynd yn rhan fawr o'n proses feddwl ni lly. Dwi'n meddwl bod o'n rhywbeth gwych bod ni'n cael rhywbeth i edrych ymlaen ato i genedlaethau ddwad fel adnodd. Bod ni'n mynd i gadael rhywbeth i genedlaeth fydd yn dod ar yn hola ni, iddyn nhw fod yn falch ohono fo yn lle llanast yn pob man. Fydd o'n rhywbeth positif iawn gobeithio. Mae efo'r potensial i fod yn adnodd da ar gyfer defnydd cymunedau lleol. Pobl sy'n ymweld, da ni'n gweld beth ydy effaith yr llwybr ar arfordir ar yr economi'n lleol a falle a mae yn tynnu pobl. A mewn oes wan lle da ni'n gweld pobl ddim eisiau teithio i ffwr ac yn bell a llai o hedfan a falle yna mae rhywbeth ychwanegol ar stepan drws yn mynd i fod i rhywbeth gwerthfawr iawn i ni gael. Ond, a da chi'n gwybod bod yna ond yn mynd i ddod, mae rhaid i ni wneud o mewn ffordd gall a synwyrol hefyd yn bydd da ni wedi gweld efo'r Covid yma yn ddyddiol yn eryru effeithiau pobl, gormod o bobl ar gyfnodau mewn un lle, ddim yn dilyn rheola, ddim yn parchu adnoddau naturiol a perchnogaeth tir breifat a ballu. Felly hwnnw ydy'r un peth sy'n ymhoeni a deud y gwir ydy, os da ni'n sôn am fynediad i'r ardaloedd yma, sut da ni'n diffinio ac yn medru dangos i bobl lle mae yna groeso iddyn nhw, a ella lle mae pobl chdi bach fwy petrysgar am adael pobl yna, neu ella ardaloedd sydd jyst chdi bach yn beryg i bobl cael mynediad yna. Mae yna sôn fod yna elfen o'r coedwigoedd yma mynd i fod yn gynhyrchiol o ran coedwigaeth, ac yn amlwg mae yna oblygiadau yn fanno o ran sut mae adrannau coedwigaeth yn gweithio ac angen i gau llefydd i ffwrdd ar gyfer torri coed ac yn y blaen. Felly mae yna lot o stwff ymarferol fydd rhaid meddwl amdano fo'n ofalus iawn. Da ni wedi gweld mapiau open access a ballu yn ardaloedd y parc. Y tristwch mawr ydy, mwyafrif o bobl dyn nhw'n methu darllen map. Felly dydy llinell ar fap ddim yn mynd i fod yn llawer o help i esbonio i bobl lle fedra nhw fynd a lle mae croeso dyn nhw fynd. Felly mae hwnna'n rhywbeth fydd angen lot o waith yn fo, dwi'n meddwl. Ond, dyddiau cynnar, edrych yn o'n bositif, symud ymlaen. A'r unig beth swn i yn dweud hefyd ydy, da ni'n ganol rhyfal, os liciwch chi, yn erbyn rhododendron ponticum yn Eryri, a trio cael yn coedlanna naturiol ni mor mewn cyflwr cystal a phosib ac mor gynhyrchiol a posib lle'n brodol. Felly mae'n bwysig bod ni efo'r adnoddau i fedru edrych ar ôl beth sgynnon ni'n barod ella cyn rhuthro i blannu lot mwy a ffeindio bod gynnon ni ddim yr adnoddau a'r sgiliau i fedru rheoli nhw i'r hir dymor lly. Dwi'n mynd i dewi wan achos mae gennych chi banel mawr a dwi'n siŵr bod yna eraill yn ysu roed i barn i mewn yma.
O, diolch Rhys am hynna. A o'i draw i Glenda. Ti eisiau tynnu ar mute, Glenda?
Right. Dyna ni, wedi wneud. Ddim yn gwybod pa iaith i dechrau nhw, so I've written my little notes in English. So first comment really, it's excellent and refreshing to hear the government and the ministers talk of something long-term and all-encompassing. excellent. The people will start thinking, hopefully, much more about woodlands and forests and what have you. And on the other hand, I think we also have to make sure that the government and its ministers stop destroying trees and woodland as well. So sort of a bit of practice what we preach there. The other refreshing thing is, I think, the focus on the importance of woodlands, trees, and nature in general on physical and mental health. I think this is excellent that this has been this concept has been picked up and run with, because at the end of the day, it's almost like preventative medicine, isn't it? Which, as perhaps a country, as a society, we haven't been too good at delivering so far. So that's excellent. Good to hear the focus on managing woodlands, and I agree completely with what Chris just said. At the moment, certainly on the woodlands that I know about, which are farm woodlands, or know a little about, it has been in all agri-environment schemes, more or less, that I've been involved in. It's fence, woodland and walk away. So it's good to hear talk of managing. And of course, at the moment, well, in fact, for quite a number of years now, it's only been grant schemes for planting woodlands generally available. So that's excellent. What I'd like to see is much more talk about individual trees, rows of trees, veteran trees, orchards, along farm, rows of trees along farm boundaries or whatever. I think those ought to be given the sort of the same sort of status as vast areas of woodland. I would be very careful with sort of coming out with reversing the decline in biodiversity. That completely depends on where you're going to plant any new trees. That could be destroying biodiversity. That's a very big statement to come out with. But the other statements of what the woodlands will bring to us, I agree with. Diolch yn fawr.
Diolch, Linda. Gwerthfawr iawn y sylwadau ni. Na i ofyn i Alwyn ddod i mewn o fyma. Ti'n clywed i Alwyn?
Okay. Alwyn Edwards. Bit of my background. I was 20 years with the MOD Forester, and now 10 years self-employed. And as Geraint said, I help with mentoring. And you want to think there's a parallel between working for the MOD and mentoring farmers on the uplands. But actually, there's a huge parallel, and I'd like to follow on from what Glenda was saying. That a lot of the farmers I meet, they tend to regard the woodlands that they've got as either dead ground or a worry about cross-compliance issues. And I've really got to go back to basics with them, because when I worked for the MOD, I was on the operational side of things. So I was implementing the state strategy, which is very similar to actually implementing that, but within the primary objectives of the landowner, which was usually a colonel, often ex-SAS or paratroop regiment, who wanted to train in the woodlands. Now it's very similar to a farmer. He wants to use the woodlands, but then he wants to, and then to get funding, you've got to deliver higher level objectives. Now they often worry farmers. So my job in the MOD was to actually say, right, we've got the higher estate strategy, but how do we deliver the primary objective? So I'm very interested on how these higher level strategic objectives get translated into the operational side of things on the farm. And that's the kind of work I'm doing with Farming Connect, really. It's going out there, listening to farmers, and actually getting to the bottom of their primary land use. or primary objectives, and helping them to discuss what are the objectives for the land. We talk about succession and keeping people on the land, creating enough work. So I'd like to see, actually, I know Farming Collector are, they create templates. There's got to be a lot more work on helping farmers to deliver these higher level objectives.
Iawn, diolch Alwyn. Diolch yn fawr. Geraint, o'n i drosodd I ti.
Ie, diolch yn fawr. Diolch yn fawr am gael rhan o'r panel ag ati. Maddeuwch I fi, mae nodiadau fi yn Saesneg, ond ei drio I cyfeithu nhw wrth I fi fynd. So, coedwig I Gymru. Jyst yn meddwl, mae'n ffordd mwy o syml lle dwi'n gallu ffitio mewn I hwn fel y ffarmwr sydd yn mynd I fod yn chwarae rhan allweddol o gyflawni'r obligiadau o'i cyrraedd y targedau yma o gael y Goedwig Genedlaethol. A dwi'n teimlo reit lwcus yma pan mae fi'n tyfu fyny nogyn ifanc o gas gan ei bob un coeden ar y ffarm, ac o fi'n meddwl sut allai gael gwared o'r rhain I gyd I gael cyef yn neis yn bob man. A erbyn ŵan, dwi'n dal I licio meddwl bod fi'n ifanc, ond mae'n meddylfryd fi wedi newid yn hollol. A mae gennym ni'r clwstwr o goed hanesyddol derw o ganol y ffarm, 35 erw ohonyn nhw. Ac ers I fi gael cymryd drosodd yn llawn gen rhieni ag ati, da ni wedi bod yn tyfu ar I allan o hiniau dros y blynyddoedd a creu yr connectivity yma wrth fynd o lwcus iawn yn gallu gweithio hefo Parc Cenedlaethol ag ati o ffensio, plannu grychoedd, o fynd o un clwstwr coed I llall, a ffensio'r coedwigaeth yna ffwrdd ag ati, a mae o wedi bod yn gweithio reit dda, da ni reit hapus, a da ni eisiau ehangu eto yma fel ffarm I gallu llwyddo mwy fod yn rhan o hwn. A da ni wedi bod yn lwcus iawn y ffordd da ni bod yn ei wneud o, da ni wedi bod yn creu mwy na jyst grych coedlannau ag ati, da ni wedi bod yn creu cysgod I rannu filiad o bob peth, a mae o wedi bod yn rhywbeth sydd wedi newid gwedd y ffarm yma I lle mae yna fwy o gysgod wedi cael ei greu, mae'r glasfell yn tyfu'n gynt, mae o'n para'n hirach yn y Glangia ag ati, a mae o wedi bod yn draws newid hollol wych i'r ffarm yma o roed fwy o goed I mewn yn y llefydd lle mae wedi siwtio, a dyna sy'n bwysig iawn bod ni'n rhoi nhw yn y llefydd sy'n siwtio'r ffermydd I gael yr delifri gorau i'r ffarmwr sydd eisiau edrych ar ôl natur, creu rhywbeth a cynhyrchu bwyd dal rhan amser, achos mae rhaid I ni gofio yn ei wlad sydd yn cynhyrchu bwyd hefyd, allan ni'n brwsio y cynhyrchiant bwyd dan carped I fynd I wledydd eraill, jyst I gael ticio obligiadau gwyrdd. So, symud ymlaen i'r 6 pwynt oedd ar yr cyflwyniad ag ati. Bersonol I fi, dwi'n teimlo na 1 pwynt mawr sydd yn fanna, mi felly ni lwyddo'r rhain I gyd ar fesul ffermydd unigol ag tyfu ar I allan. Dwi'n teimlo reit lwcus, da ni'n byw mewn ardal berffaith yn fama sydd hefo'r balans yna reit da'n barod os o'n i'n dweud. Penwythnos yma, fuon ni am dro draw at Coed y Brenin ag ati, a'r cyflesterau a pob peth sydd yn cael ei gynnig yn fanno yn rhywbeth allan ni weithio allan, yn bildio, tyfu o, ledled Cymru, yn hawdd iawn. A mi felly ni'n gwneud llawer iawn o'r dasg yma o gael y goedwig o'n blaenau heb fynd I ormod o drafferth chwaith. Diolch.
Gret, diolch Ger. Mwy na heb ti'n sôn am taro ar y mantra y goeden iawn yn y lle iawn am yr heswm iawn yn fanna I radda. Ond sylwadau gorffawr eto. I'll go to Richard now, please. Richard, thank you.
Good evening, Garen. Thank you very much, and thank you very much to be invited along to the panel this evening. As a very interesting presentation. Unlike Geraint, in a way, we've spent the last 20 years in environmental scheme, first with Goedwig and later with Glastier Advanced. where we've created a lot of new hedgerows, streamside corridors, joining to existing woodlands down to rivers, and bat roosts and new hedges for bat flights. So we've sort of worked along the conservation route, but at the heart of our business is production of, high quality Welsh beef and lamb. And I think another advantage and a plus for this national forest is the fact that it takes the sort of sustainability of what we produce in Wales to an even higher level, and it widens the margin between sort of poor, environmentally damaged imported food to the high standards that we produce here in Wales. So I think it does add to the production of food in Wales as increasing sustainability. I know it has been mentioned about this not a funding part of the National Forest, but hopefully for farmers to be involved, if they can sort of add value to the poorer production parts of their farm by growing timber, and then encouraging employment and diversification. Possibly with the National Forest, you could include sort of softwood, some sort of sweet chestnut that could be used on farm for farmers to create their own stakes and posts, and just make it more of a circular economy with the wood. So yeah, no, I think there's something there for everybody. Thank you.
Excellent, Richard. Thank you very much. Yes, but some very good points there. I'll just throw a question to James or Anne, whoever wants to come in. A lot of good work being done by farmers with the environment already, with several schemes that have been implemented by Welsh Government and about bodies like the National Park, etc. I think woodland management, and everybody would there would be a consensus on this, has been in a hiatus for a long time now, with no real incentives there. When I talk about incentives, assistance for farmers to deliver quality woodland management, we need to bring that back on the agenda. Is there, first of all, a vision to deliver some kind of assistance for that in the future? And will the concept for National Forest be part of that if it does occur?
Certainly, woodland management, as I mentioned a few times, is going to be a really key part of the National Forest going forwards. It's too early to say exactly what the sort of funding streams will look like in future years, but it's certainly something we're thinking about at the moment, and it is going to be a key part. And we're obviously talking to our colleagues in Welsh Government that are sort of looking at the sustainable farming schemes going forward and linking up with them. So even if it potentially wasn't part of our scheme, it could be part of another scheme. It's a bit too early to give you a proper answer at the moment, but it's certainly something we are looking at the moment, thinking about.
Yeah, diolch James. Da ni yn cael cwestiynau mewn. Dwi'n mynd i ofyn y cyntaf rwan. A mae hwn yn sialedig ar yr elfen carbon. Cyfleon yn y dyfodol wrth reswm i ennill arian a cael bydd incwm efo'r Woodland Carbon Code. It's in English, so I'll ask it in English. The Carbon Code is only currently available for new woodlands. This doesn't make sense. While the National Forest Scheme isn't focused on grants, if existing woodlands could get some funding via carbon offset payments, that would help keep them healthy. For example, the previous owners of our property obtained a woodland grant in 2001 to establish a woodland. We are no longer under any obligation to keep the woodland. Surely being paid to keep it healthy is the equivalent to being paid to create a new one. Our trees are probably small enough that we could cut them down without a permit. And if we don't thin, they will be unhealthy and maybe diseased. And at that point could be cut. So funding to help us keep the existing woodland and keep it healthy is important. It's something that you just acknowledged, James, and we, part of the topic. Ydy pawb yn cydweld â hynna? So rwy'n siŵr neidio mewn ar y pwnc yna?
Ddoi mewn ar hwnna, os gael. Dwi'n meddwl bod hwnna'n yn bwynt da iawn, dilys dros ben. Fel yn trafod gynnad, mae cynnal a cadw adnoddau naturiol yn rhywbeth sy'n tueddol o fod yn rhywbeth costus. Ia, mae pori yn un atab a defnyddio systema amaethyddol i fedru gweithio llaw yn llaw hefo'r elfen cadwraeth yn bwysig. Ond yn aml iawn, mae yna gosta mynd i fod yn gysylltiedig â fo, un arbenigwyr i roed cyngor neu yn weithdrefna sy'n gorfod cael ei gwneud ar y tir. Felly, a mae'n rhywbeth da ni wedi godi'n pwynt hefyd yn yr ymgynghoriad ar gyfer y taliad sengl newydd neu'r cynllun newydd fydd yn dod i mewn. I bod hi'n anodd iawn i rei o'r daliadau sydd wedi bod yn tir gofal, tir cymen, glastir ac allu wedi rhoi lot o fuddsoddiad i mewn gwaith cyfalaf. Ac ella yn y cynllun newydd ddim yn mynd i fod yn gymwys i gael mwy o waith, ond sicr yn dal hefo costa o gynnal a cadw beth sydd wedi cael ei roid i mewn o'r blaen. A mae'n edrych yn mewn bwysig, ni'n pwysleisio bod ni yn cynnal y buddsoddiad sydd wedi cael ei wneud yn flaenorol, neu mae'n gallu, weithiau'n gallu mynd yn wast, ynddo. Felly, hanfodol bod yna ffrydiau incwm ar gael i fedru cynnal beth sydd wedi cael ei fuddsoddi yn y gorffennol. A mae'r ail bwynt yn y cwestiwn yn sôn am cyngor ar be wneud efallai, ac eto mae hwn yn adlewyrchu ella prinder sgiliau a capacity yn y sector coed yng Nghymru i fedru rhoi cyngor ag arweiniad a ella cymorth os di'n briodol i fedru wneud y gwaith. Felly mae'n gret bod un o amcanion y cynllun ydy gwella sgiliau a dealltwriaeth am goedlannau a coedwigaeth yn sicr erbyn i'r coed yma fod wedi plannu ac yn barod i dechrau cael ei rheoli. Mi fydd angen fwy o bobl sydd efo'r gallu i wneud o.
Ie, diolch Rhys. Rwy'n arall sy'n neidio mewn? Gwenda?
Diolch, Guy. Yeah. Absolutely crucial to bring in management, and I think what's happened is a absolute stagnation under agri-environment schemes so far on the woodland management front, because it's just been too easy from probably the government inspection point of view to just stop, fence out and walk away, whereas we need to get the farmers back involved with their woodland, and the only way to do that really is to either have a separate standalone scheme, or hopefully, as Rhys was mentioning, let's have it in the new scheme, which is going to sort of replace both the BPS, the single farm payment, and Glastir. That it must be an integral part of that, because it's just, I think, I've been trying to remember when we last had any sort of woodland management grant available nationwide. I think it was at least 10 years ago when they had Glastir Woodland Management Scheme open. So it's desperately needed. And once there's a trigger, once there is a scheme, that'll be a trigger to hopefully keep the advisors and the people with skills to look after or to manage those woodlands. And of course, the sort of the grazing of the woodlands is important as well. But at the moment, of course, we've got unmanaged woodlands that grazing stock couldn't even penetrate. So there's a huge task in front of us there, and hopefully the National Forest will be a bit of a trigger for that.
Oh, diolch, Linda. Alwyn, have you got any quick comments on woodland management?
Yeah, I understand that point of view. You know, there's a balance of when it becomes economic, isn't it? It's that gap between economic, because the markets, you know, it's hard to argue against that. You know, the economic markets are either there or going to become more and more available. You know, we're a country where we only supply 19% of our wood products from homegrown timber. there's not many industries that poor at delivering to the market in this country. Compared with Great Britain, we're the second largest net importer in the world of timber products. So it's that gap, isn't it, that we're talking about between when they become economic and the establishment phase. And I do think that some of these objectives we're talking about providing environmental goods, aren't we? Now, as somebody sat in Welsh Government, you've got to prove that you're providing those environmental goods. That could be at the thicket stage. We've talked about maybe getting into the carbon market, but that's very difficult. You've got to show additionality to get a worldwide carbon market. That it wouldn't have happened unless you wouldn't get funding unless I've lost my thread there. But you can't get it for established woodlands because they've already established. You don't need the extra funding from carbon markets to have those woodlands. So that's a difficult one. But there's lots of other layers in Wales. We've got so many GIS layers now covering Wales. And I'm sure you can target each woodland to one of those GIS layers. I'm dealing with Glasted woodland creation at the moment, and the new scheme, there's so many different layers for Wales, from flood prevention, noise pollution, being close to populations. Every part of Wales has got a score, so if you've put your block of woodland there, you can develop a score for your woodlands to deliver these environmental goods or public benefits, or the terminology is. So I'm sure there's a way of hitting that target in a constructive way at that gap between economic and the planting stage. So I'm sure there's ways and means of doing it, and with using these headings as proof that you're delivering on Welsh Government targets. So there must be an opportunity to use the same scoring system that you have Glasted for plantations that are already established.
Diolch, Elwyn, thank you. Yeah, it's a good point, really, to be eligible, or for the woodland to be eligible for the National Forest. I just wonder, will there be a set standard when you're talking about resilient woodlands and woodlands that are fit for purpose to be a part of the National Forest? So that's something that I'm sure that will evolve. Go on to the next question, and establishing woodland, and the communism. Well, the subject is multi-purpose woodlands, but the question being, what about agroforestry? Beth am Eich Goedwigeth, be di'r sylw I hwn? Ger, wyt ti eisiau cychwyn ar hwn o gwbl?
Dim problem. Ar ochr agroforestry neu'r silvo pasture, neu be bynnag mae rhywun eisiau rhoi fel term i'w ddisgrifio fo, mae gen i fo le I chwarae, a dwi wedi ateb yn yr Q&A fanna be di'r broblem rhag gwneud mwy ohono fo yma. Mae bedwaren o fferm denantiaeth ar stad yr Hiwlas, felly mae yn tenancy agreement I yn rhwystro fi rhag plannu coed yn bob man, achos dwi'n mynd I fod yn, ar hyn o bryd, disgyn gwerth tir rhywun arall. Ond y tir sgan I Llanuwchlyn, dwi yn meddwl sbiad mwy mewn iddo fo fanno, achos mae gen I fwy o ryddid yn fanno, achos VCP a fo. Ac I fod yn hollol onest yn fanno, wedyn mae'r tir yna yn dir go galed, go anodd I gynhyrchu cig. Mae'r farchnad yn bodlon talu amdano fo ym Mhrydain ar hyn o bryd. Mae rhywun sy'n cael ei cynhyrchu fanno yn cael ei allforio I Ewrop. Felly dwi yn meddwl, os da ni'n mynd I golli'r farchnad yna, pethau eraill allai wneud arno fo, a wedyn mae rhaid chwaneg o goed I mewn yna'n fwriad sydd gennau ag ati, a da ni wedi trio rhoi dipyn dan y cynllun glastir Woodland Creation a wedi methu ond am ryw gornel fach yn fanno, oherwydd mae statws habitat ag ati yna, mae lot o'n nhw'n cael ei mygu o dan redyn ag ati hefyd, felly dwi'n gweld rôl fai goed chwarae fewn y fanne ac gallu porio fewn y coed yna'n mynd ymlaen yn bwysig iawn hefyd, daioni llith gwartheg I wneud at goedlan, mae o'n wych ag ati, ond targedu'r yr amser cywir. Dwi'n meddwl mae bob elfen o feddylfryd agroforestry, mae yna le iddo chwarae ar ambell I ffarm, ond I ddeall be mae'r ffarmwr yn gallu delifro hefyd yn bwysig iawn yn dydi.
Ond ydy, siwr iawn. Ac just I gael y drafodaeth yma gyda ffarmwr arall. Richard, with regards to agroforestry, what are your views on that option? And maybe would it be a category suitable for National Forest?
Yeah, on our farm, we through the to-gobble years, we used to lightly graze some ancient woodland, and that woodland was really nice. Cattle used to go in and out, only lightly grazed. And when we joined Gloucester Advanced, we were forced to fence it off, otherwise we couldn't enter it. And I didn't really want to, but we had to fence off 80% of the woodland. And that's turned to a massive bramble. It's embarrassing. The change from having its stock excluded is a shame. So yeah, I think it's very positive to let livestock in a controlled manner into woodland. It's positive.
Yeah, specifically with under-managed woodlands and as Glenda alluded to earlier, you know, some of them are inaccessible now, and I know from experience that you won't get better management in than cattle getting into woodland to trample and create seed beds, etc. So there is something to be said for it, but in a controlled manner is the important sentence there, I think. On agroforestry, so rwy'n arall sydd dod I mewn ar amaeth Goedwigaeth? Glenda?
Just dau peth sy'n ni'n dweud sydd yn arbennig o bwysig, a jyst yn meddwl am yr newid yn hinsawdd sydd yn dŵad, y shade and shelter. Our summers might become hotter, then livestock will need the shade. And likewise, we'll have perhaps more extremes in winter, and they'll need the shelter of the trees. So I think that's may well climb up farmers' agenda as we see, if we do carry on seeing changes in weather conditions.
Yeah, diolch Glenda. And then there's another comment on here with regards to agroforestry. There's silvo-arable agroforestry, crops planted beneath trees, producing 3D levels of cultivation with produce emerging at different times of the year. So trial we ran at Henbais in Bangor in growing forage crops within tree alleys. That was very successful. It is an option, and with the multi-benefits of that trees can provide, agroforestry option gives you a win-win because you can still produce crops and produce food. With regards to facts alluding to carbon sequestration, it will equal any commercial forestry stand, the combination of grasses and trees and the carbon they sequester. So ymlaen I gwestiwn nesa, if you wish to plant trees in urban areas, will there be a look at planning regulations to encourage local authorities to prioritise tree planting? And I'll throw that at you, Rhys, with regards to being a National Park Authority. But the question was, yeah, in urban areas, will there be a look at planning regulations to encourage local authorities to prioritise tree planting?
Wel, mae'n diddorol iawn. Ges I cwestiwn yma pan o'n i'n neud drwy'r raglen radio yn ddiweddar. Ac dwi'n meddwl bod gen yr un awdurdod lleol I fi wybod amdan y bolisi sy'n wrthyn yn erbyn plannu coed. Ond dwi'n meddwl na be hanfod y cwestiwn ydy, nad ydyn nhw ddim yn plannu mwy os liciwch chi, a mae hyn yn debyg iawn i'r sector amaethyddiaeth. Mae i gyd i wneud efo gwerth tir a defnydd tir yn y dyfodol wrth gwrs dydy. Ac ydy'r tiroedd yma sydd gen nhw mynd i fod i hangen ar gyfer datblygu. Da ni'n clywed fod brinder tai yn rheolaidd. A wedyn mae lot o'r tiroedd sydd gen yr awdurdodau lleol yn teulu fod yn fanna agorad mewn trefi a ballu. Felly ia, mae'n 6 a hanner dwsin o llall. Mae'n angen yr ardaloedd gwyrdd wrth gwrs ar gyfer iechyd y lles a mwynhad a llesiant. Ond mae'r pwysau ar gyfer datblygiad yn mynd i fod yna hefyd. Felly oes ydy'r ateb syml, mae angen edrych ar y polisia. Dwi'n meddwl bod yna lot o awdurdodau lleol hefyd ofn y costa. Mae'n cyllideba ni fel awdurdodau lleol wedi bod yn cael eu torri ers dros 10 mlynedd rwan yn rheolaidd. A dychod, da ni'n trafod gyna, os da chi'n plannu coed, mae yna waith edrych ar eu hôl nhw. Unai ar ran i iechyd nhw a diogelwch nhw, nid os ydy'r cyhoedd o gwmpas, wel maen nhw'n mynd yn fwy. Ac i meithrin nhw wrth gwrs, ac ar ben hynny mae gennych chi lot o utilities yn tueddol i fod yn yr ardaloedd yma. A dydy hogiau gas yn sicr ddim yn licio gweld coed wrth ymyl i llinella nhw mewn ffordd. Felly mae yna lot o rhywbethau bach yn adio i'r broblem yna yn yr ardaloedd trefol. Slant gwahanol i edrych arno fo, o'n i'n meddwl dydy mewn o'n gynharach efo pwynt oedd Glenda neu dydy hefyd. Mae'n mynd i fod yn eitha anodd yn yr ardaloedd gwledig hefyd yn de. Dachod, pan da chi'n ystyried rhywle fatha Parc Genedlaethol, mae gennym ni'r rheina GIS yma ar gyfer archeoleg, cynefinoedd, dynodiadau gwahanol o ran cadwraeth a ballu, sydd yn mynd i atal plannu coed yn sicr ar raddfa fawr. Ella fydd yna rhywfaint ar ôl i agro Forestry yna, ond mewn rhai ardaloedd lle mae'r tirwedd yn bwysig iawn, fatha ar Dydwy a ballu, mae'n mynd i fod yn eitha cyfyngedig yn rhywle felly hefyd mewn ffordd. Felly mae yna lot o gyfyngiadau mewn ardaloedd gwledig sy'n mynd i effeithio faint o blannu a coedlanna fed ar datblygu, sydd yn mynd i roi mwy o bwysau wedyn ar y tiroedd gwell ar gyfer plannu, a wedyn da chi'n dod lawr i just rhyfel wedyn economaidd mewn ffordd. Da ni'n gweld yn barod y sector llaeth yn eithriadol o gry, a dydy cynigion cadwraeth ddim yn apelio iddyn nhw o gwbl. Ac oedd Glenda'n sôn am gwerth cysgod gwrych a coed a falle. Dwi'n siŵr bod lot o hogiau beef a defaid yn gweld hynny'n sicr. Ond os ydych chi'n gynhyrchwr llaeth, maen nhw dal ar hyn o bryd yn teimlo nad oes am gwerth iddo fo, bod o'n wrth gynhyrchiol hyd yn oed os liciwch chi, bod gwartheg yn sefyll o dan goedan yn lle allan yn pori ac yn troi'r borfan laswellt. Felly mae yna ddipyn golew o waith newid meddylfryd yn mynd i fod hefyd yn yr ardaloedd yma.
Na ti, yeah. Diolch ti am hynna. There's a question here with regards to community groups. I'll throw it to you, James. We have an outdoor health project in the Dyfi biosphere, including woodland activities. Can community groups contribute to the National Forest planning at this stage?
Yeah, I think the answer is yes to that. I'm not quite sure what angle they're coming at, but yeah, certainly we want to hear from all different kinds of groups. As I mentioned earlier, we have got the National Forestry Heritage Fund community grant scheme open at the moment as well. So we want community groups to come forward with ideas for new planting in whether it's in rural or urban areas. So yeah, we definitely want to engage with as many people as possible at this point in time. So if they've got good examples, case studies, we'd really like to hear them.
Thanks, James. You are working up to a consultation period.
Yeah, so middle of next year, we're thinking about a more formal consultation period, and all of this is, we're just taking, hearing people's views at the moment, take it away, develop some proposals, and there'll be some more formal stuff next year.
So I take it, what I was going to say, I take it you'll be consulting on and maybe having a similar session with the community groups and community woodlands, maybe.
Yeah, I think some of the team have been talking to some of the community groups already, but yeah, something we'll need to pick up if there's more to do on that. But yes, yeah, we will do.
And there's another question here for you as well, James. Are there two separate parts to the provision of National Forest, one being the public access and health benefits. So it's the other one's not mentioned, but yeah, but public health access and health benefits are obviously a huge key area for access to National Forest. But the bigger question is, the access itself, and is that under what kind of agreement, and you'd be coming to with woodland owners, but the liabilities as well, how will that be covered? Will there be financial assistance for tree safety surveys, etc., if the woodland is open to access?
Yeah, I mean, that's the sort of stuff we'll need to work out over the coming months. I mean, at the moment, we do make money available to people to create wood. As I said, we've got a few schemes open at the moment where people can bid for money to create new woodlands, but it's only 1 year capital funding at the moment. So we haven't got that sort of ongoing maintenance that people probably need. But as we go forward, we can, through talking to stakeholders and others, we can understand what kind of needs there are. And it sounds like there's quite a lot of needs for ongoing maintenance. So that's something that we can take away and discuss with others in Welsh Government. But as I say, at the moment, we've only got 1 year capital funding, but we will need to think how we then fund it longer term in future years.
I think an interesting addition onto that one, James, would be insurance provision. As an ex-insurance guy, I know that it worries a lot of landowners and land managers in terms of public access, and especially with tree risks. And with climate change kicking in and seeing more tree diseases coming through, it's going to put different species at different stresses, and some of them react quite differently. The sort of ash is a prime example of something that can decline really rapidly and become quite dangerous quite quickly. So yeah, it just adds to the sort of hesitancy of people signing up to provide public access potentially to woodlands.
Okay, yeah, that's a good point. Something again we'll need to work through as well. But thanks for that.
And just on that issue of access, I'm going back to Richard and Geraint and even Glenda, maybe with regards to Richard. We'll come to you first. What would what would persuade you to have public access into the woodlands on the farm? Or
I think it very much depends on where your woodlands are on the farm. I mean, if you have access that doesn't go across your existing farmland, it's a bit like asking Nissan, do you mind people walking through the factory floor to get to the forest at the back? Farms quite busy places, machinery moving around. Whereas if you can avoid the busy parts of the production part of the farm and enter the woodland safely, and again, it will come down to the economics. If you can have some help to put in signage and paths and maintain it and make a safe environment for people to enter, leave, and even if you possibly want to diversify into perhaps creating a well-being area, if there's income that'll keep family-owned farms through the use of the National Forest, and everybody's a winner. But automatic, the right to roam into the National Forest on all farms would be a complete blocker for most people, I would say.
Yeah, it would have to be by a specific agreement. I'll jump to Geraint. Ger, what's your view on public access to?
Ie, da ni angen bod yn ofalus iawn os oes rhywbeth yn digwydd ar yng nghefn I fasa fo, bod rhywun wedi mynd I rwle na dydyn nhw ddim I fod wedi mynd I hyd yma. A sut da ni'n dod dros yr hurdle yna mynd ymlaen I dyfodol. Sgynna I'm sy'n talu chwaneg o yswiriant I gael cyfro fi'n hun I just cadw bobl I fynd fel ymyno nhw. Mi ddylse fod lawr ar sgwydda'r person sydd yn penderfynu mynd i'r cae lle mae'r tarw ag ati. Mae'n ychydig o grey area fanna. Dwi'n gwybod os o'n I eisiau agor yn ffarm fyny fwy o bobl gan mynd I bob cornel ono fo, dwi'n siŵr so'n ni'n cael mwy o drafferth, cael cover insurance I gallu gadael hyn a ddigwydd. Ond os oes yna lefydd pwrpasol wedi'w gwneud a bod bobl yn parchu hynna, ella'n gweld problem a faswn ni wrth y modd yn sgwrsio efo'r bobl yma sy'n mynd, a fel dwi ar hyn o bryd yn sgwrsio efo bobl sy'n dod ar rhannu'r tir yma ag ati, dwi'n licio deithio nhw beth sy'n mynd mlaen yma a cael y sgwrs yn mynd i pawb o dallt. Mae'n fwy na jyst cynnyrchu bwyd yn mynd ymlaen ar y ffermydd yma. A da ni fel y cynhyrchwyr angen y cwswllt yna hefo'r consumer iddyn nhw gael dallt yn iawn beth yw'r pictiwr llawn o beth mae bob ffarm yn ei wneud ynde.
Ie, pwynt da iawn. A na i ddod yn dol at y ti toc rwan, ond dwi eisiau jyst mynd i Glenda yn sydyn os ti eisiau rhoi sylw i mewn ar hyn, Glenda. Be o ti'n feddwl fydd ffermwyr yn barod i ganiatáu mynediad?
Dwi'n cytuno'n gryf efo be oedd Geraint yn deud wwan, cos dwi'n meddwl bod ffermydd yn fodlon iawn i siarad efo bobl am beth sy'n mynd mlaen ar y ffarm. A obviously the liability issues are way up the top of the top of somebody's mind once you're inviting people onto farm. But what came to my mind when we were talking about this was maybe there could be areas where it was open access to woodlands anytime. But I think one of the, if we looked at previous agri-environment schemes and picked out the pluses, I would think that, you know, those educational visits where groups of children, students, and it could be expanded so anybody couldn't, we're invited onto farms on specific times, and then the farmer was paid so much a year to have groups visit, show round, and perhaps that would be in a more controlled fashion, so that could be going on. And maybe, same as Richard was saying, you could have areas which were away from the farm and that you had created a safer an environment as you possibly can when you've got trees and branches and what have you around. I think farmers would be open to the idea, but there would have to be a lot of trust that the people were coming on to the land were respectful of the land and the farming, the agriculture and the environmental management.
Yeah,
so that just raising awareness.
Yeah,
there's a big point there.
Yeah, diolch Glenda. And very, I'll just jump to Alwyn with regards to woodland and forestry, Alwyn. Similar question with regards to access. Obviously issues with operational woodlands, but what would be your...
well, there's always an issue that's coming up. People, you know, are worried about the liability, foreign branch, you know, getting accused of not managing your woodlands correctly. There's very few cases where the landowner's been found liable. It's a case of practical management. You've got to assess the risk. And woodlands, I don't know the figures, but there's a very small figure associated with injury in woodlands. And there's guidance now. It's been reviewed and it's quite up to date now. The guidance, you know, there's they call it practical tree management guidance developed by the Forestry Safety Code, where you actually zone the woodlands, and you could actually use the same process on a farm. You know, I do it on mixed woodlands. You zone it, so you very much as Richard said, you know, some parts where you wouldn't encourage access, or you know, the risk could be high, and then you develop an inspection regime based on that, and you know, you regard as landowners as a competent assessor, if you like. It's only when you come to specific dangerous trees that you want to keep, you might want to bring in an arboriculturist. So I think the concern is there, but there's ways of managing it that are regarded as practical, I think is the terminology they use all the time. So it can be integrated, but you know, you need a strategic plan on your woodlands and implement that. can be worked around, I'm sure.
Yes, yeah, another good point. I'll crack on. There's some really positive comments on the agroforestry, and that the option should be made available and integrated into international forest. Obviously, a lot depending on different factors there, but also the need to look at flood defences and other benefits which definitely wouldn't wish to have public access, wooded areas alongside major roads, etc. So there are, it's a matter of planning correctly, the right tree in the right place for the right reason again. We'll come to a question for Geraint, back to you, Ger. What confidence does Geraint, and this is your other hat, have in the ability of Natural Resources Wales to create new woodlands, since it is continuing to clear fell each year and more trees in the Welsh Government woodland estate than it is planting annually, question mark. Last year actually added 0 hectares of new woodlands on the government's estate. Ti isio ateb hwnna?
Ie, na, hapus I drio ateb o. Fel aelod bwrdd, mae'r statistig o ddim yn dorcalonus I ddweud y gwir pan mae gennym ni'n obligiadau a'n targedau I gyrraedd a'r pwysigrwydd o goed. Ydy'r cwestiwn yna yn directio I commercial element forestry neu i'r coed cynhenid? Sy'n ni'n cael gwybod pryn di'r cwestiwn yna ddweud y gwir. Fel rhywun sydd yn aelod o'r bwrdd a nghalon yn defnydd tir, mae o'n siomedig os ydy Cyfoeth Naturiol ddim wedi plannu dim coedwigaeth newydd yn fanna. Mae o rhywbeth da ni angen fel aelod o bwrdd. Mae yna gwestiynau angen i'w gofyn yn fanna ac da ni angen yr atebion ac bod ni yn llwyddo I gyrraedd targedau o paint da ni yn drio plannu bob blwyddyn. Ond mae'r sychder 2018 wedi ymharu efo paint o goed sydd wedi bod yn gallu bod ar gael I blannu hefyd, so dydy o ddim yn clear cut bod Cyfoeth Naturiol ddim wedi just mynd allan a plannu coed chwaith. Mae yna bethau eraill wedi ymharu ar gallu I gyrraedd targedau hefyd ynde.
Ydy. Iawn, oce.
Ie, na I amddiffyn Geraint yn fanna hefyd. Mae rhaid I ni gofio, mae'r wlad wedi gwynebu lot o sialensa, pethau fatha phytophthora yn hitio larch a ballu sydd wedi dod â rhaglenni cwympo coed yn ei blaen oherwydd diogelwch neu atal lledaeniad clwy a pethau felly. Felly, ie, dydy o'm yn atab hawdd. Mae hyn bach yn sawrdanol nad oes na ddim plannu newydd wedi digwydd, ond o ran faint maen nhw'n dorri a pam, mae yna resymau ehangach na just torri coed am dorri coed, llynde.
Ie, na ti, iawn. Dwi'n mynd I sylwadau ar elfen chat rwan, ac mae'n un yma, the idea of national forest, perhaps a naturally forested nation even, is likely to become a strong cultural thing through written and spoken literature, film and other media. It will obviously could be a visitor, including local people, marketing brand. I know you're working on the branding now, James, and the team in general. But do you want to throw any agree with that or?
Yeah, I think it's a really lovely comment actually. When I saw it a minute ago, and I think that's a really nice way of thinking about the national forest. And I think it will be, that's where we'd like to get to, is this really strong cultural thing. And we are developing a brand, as you mentioned, that hopefully will build on that. And as we start to roll out the brand to woodlands across Wales, it will become something that people can visit more and more and begin to love. And I mentioned the idea of a sort of emotional connectivity as well, and everybody sees it as their own bit of woodland near where they live, and they can enjoy and they make memories with their families. I think it's a really nice way of looking at it. I like the way they've David's phrased that in his comment.
Yeah. I think one important thing there is to remember that, and integrate, and I know it will happen, the Welsh language and culture.
Yeah. really,
as well, maybe.
That's really important as well. Yeah.
Yeah, and to focus on that element.
It goes back to the connectivity thing I mentioned. Sorry.
No, carry on. Yeah,
I was going to say it goes back to the connectivity point I was making earlier. When we think about connectivity, we tend to think of it as, connectivity by biodiversity, which will be a big part of the national forest. But it's also that connectivity to people, emotional connectivity. Thinking through that as well, I think will be really, really important.
Yeah,
and building on culture and history of Wales, the language. It's all part of that sort of connected part of the national forest as I see it.
Excellent. And the next one here, has the Welsh Government thought about encouraging the private markets for natural capital? Carbon, we've spoken about, but access being another one we've spoken about, but no actual value to it, and biodiversity, air quality, water quality, etc. What's your thoughts on that with regards to a value to them?
Yeah, it's something. I wouldn't say we've done well, maybe wrong, but I wouldn't say we've done a great deal on it yet. I mean, as part of the work, we're going to start to develop a business case for the national forest, so that will need to bring in those sort of elements about the wider benefits that we can get from a national forest. So it's not something we've done a great deal on yet, but we'll do in the coming months. We'll start to think more about it.
Oh yeah. Does anybody else want to comment on that element on natural capital? Richard?
Well, I've just got a comment for James talking about branding. If he looks at the Stump Up the Trees website and on the Bryn Arrow mountain near Abergavenny.
Yeah, I've seen that, yeah.
And in 100-foot high letters that
it's brilliant.
Is cut in and left standing. It's really incredible.
Yeah, that's great. That
they're a charity raising private money to plant 1 million trees in and around the Brecon Beacons. So they're doing fine work.
Yeah, we're really impressed with what they did there.
And I got one point to ask Geraint with his NRW hat on. One of the blockers I see on a lot of farm situations could be in the future that NRW to give permissions to plant on land. If farms have been in environmental schemes and that land that goes to the top of the farm closer to existing woodland might have been in sort of low inputs, no inputs for a few years, I think NRW have got a tight framework which really blocks the ability to plant that land, which is really suitable for tree growth, maybe a bit more dangerous to take tractors on now, and it'd really fit. Whereas, quite often that land comes in as sort of what's the word they use? Habitat land. And that's something that probably needs to be looked at, that it's not all habitat land, and whether you can sort of have a look into whether NRW given a little bit more room to maneuver and be a bit more agile to allow trees in those areas, possibly.
Yes, definitely. It's something I would like to see myself happening, really. I think it would be pretty much fully supported by NRW to make it happen. We just want more flexibility with Welsh Government through, say that it's in a glass tier option now with no inputs. You just want flexibility coming out of it to be able to turn it into something else instead of having it stuck as a no input option, which is actually not delivering much really, because its productivity is dropping with a no input. It's carbon storage, the organic matter, it's all there dropping away from no inputs on it at all, and it's a big loss really there. But what you want going forward in the future is that ability within our new public goods scheme to be able to give us that flexibility to plant up these steep banks with either native woodlands or conifers for a farm income in the future and so on. I think the glass tier has failed on when we were taking out the shelter belts and so on, that the shelter belts weren't replaced at the same time because they provided that farm with an income, and that farm's not having, that potential isn't there now going forward for that farm to obtain that income, say in 20, 30, maybe 40 years to harvest that shelter belt again, is it?
Yeah, no.
I think if I can jump in here as well, gentlemen, it goes to the heart of the discussions that we've been having as well in terms of how various schemes are managed and governed. You know, the Glassdoor has tended to be GIS based and computer managed, and if the computer says no, then computer says no. Whereas if you had regional flexibility with people who knew the area, like we were very fortunate to have in the national park, it gives you that bit of leverage or flexibility to be able to adapt to local situations, where you can find compromise in how and where you plant, and look at different densities and so on. Whereas if you're stuck with just a national prescriptive GIS layer that says no, and people who can't interpret that data or be able to go out onto site and assess on foot if that decision or layer is correct, then it will be quite a hurdle then to overcome. So it just goes, again, it reflects the having value of people with knowledge and local people with understanding of what they've got in their areas and what will work and what won't. It's perceived by some as a cost in terms of management, but I think it's worth that in terms of the additionality or the value that it provides to agreements and being able to deliver effectively locally.
Diolch, Rhys.
I think,
Brenda,
can I come in
agree with
there?
that? Yeah.
I think this is a huge point because, as I said, I think a lot of the schemes so far, that once you're in the scheme, that's it. You can't change anything. The flexibility is not there. So that's exactly what Geraint was talking about. So just we must absolutely have that. And the other thing is the best local person in the area to decide what will work or won't work and where the valuable habitats are or not, in my opinion, is the farmer himself. That's the starting point. If the farmer is given the freedom to come up with a farm plan, all-encompassing farm plan on all his habitats, woodlands and what have you, then that is more, in my opinion, likely to be a much better plan than anybody else's. Obviously bringing in the experts for fine-tuning that, but that's got to be the starting point to move all these objectives forward.
Oh, diolch, Linda.
Hello?
Yeah, diolch fawr ti. I can see that time is really going on, so I'm just going to cover a couple of comments and questions for you again. This is a comment, but I'm going to question or bring something up from it. Comment to say the National Forest is a wonderful idea. Engaging schools is really positive as children who are involved in planting will nurture and protect throughout their lives. Access for schools to woodland, and there have been schemes in the past, agri-environmental schemes, Sir Gofal being one of them. I think if I remember rightly, there was an option for access by the public to Sir Gofal paths, or a choice of 6 school visits, was it? Am I right? To woodlands for those in a scheme. Richard, were you?
Yeah, we partaked in that. It was really interesting. We had a school from Newport used to come up, and they were a Welsh-speaking school. So Helen used to try and deliver some of the visit in Welsh, and then I used to do my little bit, unfortunately, in English. But yeah, no, they were great. They were a primary school, and we used to have about 8 or 10 visits a year. Yeah, very positive.
So it's feasible that a similar concept be delivered in future schemes, really.
Yeah, and the point made earlier about them being managed as opposed to just open access, which is, as Geraint mentioned as well, can be a little bit more hazardous.
Yeah. Rhys, beth ti'n meddwl, beth di
Sorry, the mute button. Ie, mae mynediad i ysgolion yn beth pwysig iawn. Da ni'n gweld yn aml bod plant yn colli cysylltiad efo cefn gwlad, sut mae bwyd nhw'n cael ei cynhyrchu, dealltwriaeth nhw gefn gwlad, patrymau cefn gwlad, arogleuon, pethau tymhorol hyd yn oed. Felly mae rhywbeth sy'n cael plant allan o'r dosbarth ac yn ôl i fyddu dilo, cael mwdar i wely, so falle yn mynd i fod yn gret, dydy. Mae rhaid i'r profiadau maen nhw'n gael fod yn rhai da, ynddi. Da ni gyd yn abod ambell i ffermwr blin. Ella bod fi'n un ohonyn nhw. Mae'r personoliaeth a'r neges maen nhw'n gael ar yr ymweliad yna'n hanfodol. Felly, os da chi'n mynd i wneud o, mae rhaid chi'n wneud o i safon da, ynddi. Yn hytrach na ella pawb yn drio i wneud o. Dydy o ddim i bawb. A ddylia fo'n cael ei arfodi ar bawb, ond i rhai sydd yn gallu ac yn licio mwynhau, dangos ac esbonio yna gwych ynddi.
Ie, gret.
Ga i just twtio ar hwnna, please. Un o'r pleserau mwyaf ges i yn Gia o cael plant ysgol gynradd Bro Tryweryn yma i blannu grych efo ni. Ac mi ddoth Rhydian o'r Parc Cenedlaethol lawr ac oedd Arwel, Morris a Billy Taylor, ddau warden lleol hefo ni'n plannu'r grych. A wedyn fi a Rachel y wraig rhannu'r grŵp o blant 90 ac 11 i fyny hefo ni 4 grŵp. Ac oedd o jyst yn wych cael plannu grych hefo nhw ac holi nhw a siarad ynglyn â ffordd oedden nhw'n meddwl o hyn yn mynd i weithio, pam bod ni'n rhoid o grych i mewn ag ati ac codi mesen allan o'r ddaear a gofyn beth ydych chi'n feddwl di hwn a wedyn gofyn os nhw'n coelio bod y resen yma'n gallu tyfu fod yr goeden dderwen anferthol neu'n fanna ac yn y blaen. Ac o'n ddiwrnod rhewllyd oer diflas i fod allan ac o pawb a gwen ar ei gwyneb erbyn diwedd y diwrnod wedi mwynhau'n fawr iawn ynde. Mae rhywbeth da ni angen gwneud mwy ohono fel y Rhys yn dweud. Mae'n bwysig bod ni yn creu y cwswllt neu nôl hefo trefydd, neu'r bobl sy'n prynu'r bwyd da ni'n gynhyrchu. Da ni wirioneddol angen y cwswllt yna wedi cryfhau yn ei ôl, does.
Oes, gytuno, Geraint. Llwyr gytuno. Mae'n bwynt da iawn ydy gwir, a falle bod ne gyfle yn y dyfodol i allu defnyddio Coedlan Genedlaethol yma ar brand, os lici di, i werthu cynnyrch fel rhan o brand Cymru sydd wedi cael ei sôn amdano fo. Felly, mae yna un cwestiwn, there's another question here. I'll throw this one to you, James. You've probably seen it. Any plans to support Welsh nurseries to supply more tree saplings, the more tree saplings we need? Or are we going to be dependent on imports? There is a scheme available now to help nurseries.
Yeah, so I mentioned earlier that we've got the Forestry Industry Recovery Scheme, which we launched a couple of months ago. It closes on the 18th of October. But the primary aim of that is to increase nursery capacity within Wales. So there's, I think, I'm getting quite bad feedback. But there was £1.5 million put into that scheme. And if it doesn't fully go to nurseries, then there's other options around ground preparation. But the primary focus was around building nursery capacity in Wales, so we won't need to rely so much on imports. So we don't want to rely on imports because of the problems that can cause. But yeah, so there is a scheme if people are interested. It closes soon, so be quick. Yeah,
I think 18th of October you said, was it?
Yeah, 18th of October, yeah. Forestry Industry Recovery Scheme.
Okay, thank you very much for that. If there are any other quick questions, there are comments that have come in. I'm not going to have time, unfortunately. I'm really sorry to go through them now. Hopefully we can answer you and maybe have a discussion on email. I gau, dwi jyst eisiau mynd a cael sylwadau chi gyn y panel un am un o ran y drafodaeth heno a'ch gweledigaeth chi a be ydych chi'n weld fel datblygiad fydd yn bositif i ni allu ar ymlaen efo cysyniad y Coedlan Genedlaethol. Rhys, ddau atat ti eto i gychwyn.
Dwi'n cael y teimlad na fi di'r fall guy ar gyfer hwn hyn yma. Ond safbwynt i, dwi'n meddwl yn bersonol, os da ni eisiau gwneud y dyhead yma i weithio, mae rhaid i beth bynnag nawn ni'n gynllun ffitio mewn efo y gefnogaeth amaethyddol fydd yn dod yn y dyfodol, dach chi'n sôn am single farm payment a be fydd yn dod ar ei ôl o, yn gynlluniau glasur neu am beth amgylcheddol, mae rhaid iddyn nhw ffitio hefo'i gilydd a cydweithio a ddim cael gwrthdaro mewn ffordd. Mae eisiau cynlluniau hir dymor yn ei lle, efo gallu i ymatab yn lleol, dwi'n meddwl, yn bwysig iawn. Bod pethau'n integrated os liciwch chi, ac yn mynd i weithio, ac hir hoedledd ynddo, da ni wedi clywed sawl gwaith heno, mae'n gynlluniau ella cyllid am flwyddyn, neu chydig o flynyddoedd a ddim yn para wedyn, ond bod modd i berson oed Geraint yn ffermwr ifanc dyda ni, neu penderfyniad rwan a peidio dioddef amdano fo mewn 10 mlynedd pan mae'r cynllun hwnnw'n dod i ben, bod o'n medru cadw i fynd mewn ffordd, lle mwyn iddo fo fod yn rhywbeth gwirioneddol ar gyfer y genhedlaeth nesaf. Ac i bobl weld wir werth mewn coed a be maen nhw'n gynnig mewn ffordd, enwedig rhai o'r hogiau godro yma, felly. Felly mae'n reit exciting, dwi'n edrych ymlaen i weld beth ddaw ohono fo. Ymlaen â ni.
Diolch, Rhys. Alwyn, ddoi ato ti.
Yeah, it appears there's a lot of goodwill out there. And I think, this Stump Up for Trees has been a prime example of that. It's funded outside Welsh Government, if you like. But it's all to do with these local champions taking things on. I think, we're going through difficult times. And I think what it has shown us is that, there's a community spirit out there. And, if you can get local champions on board, with the branding and focus your attention on there, I think, we've got the push, if you like, from the Welsh Government. But I think, you can look at a bottom-up approach. I'm very optimistic, I think, about the future.
Great, diolch Alwyn. And Richard?
Sorry about that. I think a very positive presentation from James, very interesting. And just to touch on Alwyn mentioned then about Stump Up for Trees, they're doing a great job to try and link up people who want to fund tree planting and landowners who want to plant trees. At the end of the day, it's all about getting trees in the ground. And if the National Forest can help achieve that, and we've mentioned branding, if we can add value to Welsh lamb and beef with, further examples of sustainable ways of producing food, and hopefully create, rural jobs and helps sustain farm income to keep family farms, going well into the future.
Diolch, Richard. Thank you for that. Glenda?
Right, well, I think it's a excellent concept. It's all encompassing, which is always good. I think what we really need to be aware of is how government policy as far as any trees or woodlands on farmland governs so much, doesn't it? And we've alluded to the things like the negative aspects of having trees on your land as far as the basic payment scheme goes, the fence and walk away aspects of Glasgow. So we need to really focus on that. And I've been trying hard to think why the educational visits that we've talked quite a bit about now, and I talked about way in the beginning, the Tigofal educational visits were stopped. We tried to get them into Glasgow, and there was some reason the government couldn't. There was some funding reason or liability or something. So we need to overcome these hurdles instead of just saying, no, we're not going to do that because it's too much traffic. And then just on if I could just come back on that, nurseries, local provenance, we really must get that right, because we've been talking about that since I worked for Coed Cymru when Coed Cymru first started, which is how many years ago now? 30 or something like that. The debate has been there. we should have sorted that by now, but good that we're on it again. And can I just put a plea in for, we've been talking about planting, then we're talking about planting trees from abroad very often. What's wrong with natural regeneration? Why do we want stuff straight away and planted? Can I throw that in? And we haven't mentioned the tenant farmers that I saw in a comment somewhere, because that's another massive issue on how tenant farmers can use their land, isn't it? And whether they can plant trees and who owns anyway the trees on their land. What I said right at the beginning, maybe we haven't really discussed much on that, only briefly, the individual trees, how important they are. I think we should be talking about our heritage, our tree heritage, the veteran trees, the traditional boundaries, as opposed to, there's a lot of focus on woodlands. I think the other mass of trees is just as important, and probably massively important as far as biodiversity is concerned. Diolch yn fawr.
Excellent. Diolch yn fawr I ti. Be ydy sy'n cael ei gyfri neu'n gymwys I bod yn Goedwig Genedlaethol, ac mae rhaid dod I benderfyniad ar hynny wrth reswm. A mae sylw i'r tenantiaid yn un pwysig heb os nag yn ei bai. Mae o'n fater sy'n mynd gobeithio I gael ei drafod efo'r berthynas rhwngth y tenant a'r landlord lle, ac efo llawer yn nhw ddim mewn lle I allu cael caniatad I blannu coed cyn ceisio I mewn I gynllun. Yn ola, Geraint, ti isio rhoi mewn bwn?
Sorry. I fi, fel y ffarmwr sy'n mynd I fod yn chwarae ran yn cyrraedd yr oblygiadau'r targedau o greu'r Goedwig Genedlaethol, dwi eisiau gwerth allan o hwn I fi'n hun fel busnes, achos busnes dwi diwedd dydd, dwi eisiau talu'n mortgage, talu'n rent ag ati, so mae rhaid iddo fod yn rhywbeth sy'n mynd I fod yn ddeniadol i'r ffarmwr fod eisiau bod yn rhan ohono fo, yn lle rhywbeth bod y ffarmwr yn mynd I gael i'w chwthio mewn iddo fo, bod o ddim isio mynd iddo fo, bod o just yn gael neud o I dicio bocs. Ond arwain I hynny, dwi wedi mwynhau'r cyflwyniad da ni wedi gael heno, ac mae nghalon I wedi cynnesu tuag at potensial o be felly ni greu fel ffermwyr yma yng Nghymru yn cydweithio hefo bob stakeholder arall sydd yn rhan o hwn I gallu cyflawni targedau ynde.
Gret, diolch Ger, diolch yn fawr iawn I ti am hynna. Ac un peth nath yn haro fi gyna ni'n sylwi, chi'n sôn am Stamp Up for Trees a felly, dwi'n gweld a sylwi bod rhai cynlluniau wan yn cael eu cymeradwyo I blannu ar tir comin. Os dwi'n gywir, ac wrth reswm mae tir comin efo mynediad agored yn barod, felly mae wythian y fanna I ddilyn a fedru cryfhau, dwi'n meddwl, ar gyfer prosiectau fatha coedlanna fel hyn, lle. Does dim byd I mi wneud mellach, dwi'n meddwl, dwi'n mynd I ddod o I ben rwan. Dwi isio, fysa ni'n gallu trafod lot chwaneg. Da ni wedi trafod tipyn, ond mae lot da ni ddim wedi drafod hefyd. A falle fydd yna gyfle eto gobeithio yn fuan iawn. Yn enwedig a gweld y datblygiadau, y cysyniad a'r prosiect yn datblygu, yn edrych ymlaen yn fawr iawn I weld hynny'n digwydd. Dwi eisiau diolch yn ofnadwy iawn I chi'r panelwyr Glenda, Richard, Alwyn, Rhys a Geraint. Diolch I ti, James, yn ofnadwy iawn. Ac Ann, hwn I man, ti wedi bod yn dawel yn y cefndir yma, dwi'n wedi dod â ti mewn ar y sgwrs. Wyt ti isio rhoi rhyw sylw neu dweud y beth i gloi o'r ochr fel cynrychiolwyr Llywodraeth?
No, I just want to say diolch yn fawr iawn. Thank you very much for everybody who's joined this today. It's really, really important that we engage with as many farmers as possible. They really are a key stakeholder. We were hoping to do a lot of engagement, as James said, initially over the summer period, especially at the Royal Welsh, but obviously we couldn't do that. So this really is, it's been a great opportunity. We've really have learned so much, and hopefully we can continue to work with farmers and engage more as we go forward. Diolch yn fawr.
Diolch, Anne. Thank you, James. Do you want to just say a few words?
Yeah, just really thank everybody for their time this evening. I found it fascinating. It's highlighted the opportunities that are there, but also some of the things we need to think about more as we move forwards. So as Anne said, we'll keep this engagement going as we go forwards, and as time goes on, we'll be able to share more stuff with you. So thank you very much. It's been great.
Diolch, James. Dwi eisiau diolch hefyd I Dafydd a Fion sydd wedi gweithio'n dawel yn y cefndir efo'r ochr cymorthi efo'r ochr technegol. Ac hefyd wrth gwrs Hefin Jones sydd wedi gwasanaethu'r elfen gyfieithu sydd wedi bod yn wych eto. Dwi wedi gweld sylw yn y ddau iddo fo. Dwi'n gobeithio bod pawb wedi mwynhau heno. Just I ddeud diolch I chi am ymuno ac nawn ni weld chi'n fuan eto gobeithio. Diolch yn fawr iawn.